Podcasting is more than just talking, it's listening. BSing with Bob Schmidt.
The BS with Bob Schmidt podcast, from social anxious teenager to professional speaker, Marcus Bales is my latest guest. The book is called Speak Confident. I like talking with entrepreneurs. I like talking to people about marketing, and I like to talk to people about business. And Marcus, you kind of hit all three of them on the head with your skill set, haven't you?
Yes. So the first kind of step in the book was me telling my story of being a very socially anxious kid. And my biggest thing was, once I was able to speak, it was speaking confidently enough to get people to want to listen. We think that just being able to utter the words is enough, but we forget that, if you don't sound confident in what you're saying, no one's going to want to listen to you.
So how do you get people to listen to you?
A lot of that comes down to the little nuances of how we talk, and even to how we stand, how we position our bodies. In the book, I break down the mechanics of your tone, what the tone of your voice says, what the pace of your speech says, what dramatic pauses can do to your speech, and then what kind of stance you should have when you're talking to someone, and what kind of stances are going to make you feel more powerful and look more powerful and confident when you're speaking.
So is this book good for somebody that's having an issue with getting up in front of a group of peers, or is this a book of somebody that wants to go out and become a professional speaker like yourself?
It's good for pretty much anybody who's struggling with social anxiety. The way I look at the book is it is the first step in the process. It's not the end-all, be-all solution to overcoming your social anxiety. And by reading the book, you're not going to automatically become a professional speaker. But what it does is it gets you started. It's that first step in acknowledging, one, that you do have social anxiety, and two, that you want to do something about it. It's broken down into three sections. The first one is personal interactions, which is any sort of conversation between 1 to 5 people. Now, you might be thinking, well, I've had conversations with way more people than that. But to me, that's about the biggest conversation you can have tangibly with a group of people. Then you move into business interactions, which is any interaction between you to 10 people that your well-being, your job, or your money are on the line. So it has a little bit more at stake than just a normal everyday interaction. Then the last type is a public interaction, which is any interaction between you and 10 to 10,000, maybe more people, where you're the center of attention. This is the one that most people are terrified of because you kind of lose the safety net of the normal, smaller conversation. There's a back and forth that happens that kind of gives people comfort. And when you start to go into a public interaction, you lose that safety net of a back and forth. So it encompasses all of the big speaking areas on a smaller level to kind of get you ready to start this journey to overcoming social anxiety.
So, Marcus, explain to us what social anxiety is.
Social anxiety is the fear of speaking in front of people. Now, that could be, kind of a broad sense of what it is. There's different severities of it. Some people only have it on a micro level, so they only are really afraid of speaking in front of just a couple of people, or maybe they're terrified of speaking to just one person. Maybe it's someone they find attractive, someone they want to be more intimate with. Or it could be on a macro level. They're scared of public speaking, which is the number one fear in the country by far. So there's a lot of different nuances when it comes to social anxiety, but the main sort of identifier is the kind of the irrational fear of speaking to other people.
You know, it's so funny you talk about that being a big fear. That is one of my biggest fears in the world, is speaking in front of people. I can talk on the radio. I can talk as a podcaster. If you get me in a group of like 3 or 4 people besides my buddies playing cards, drinking beer, and BSing, I hate it. It took me a long time to be able to get over talking in front of a group at work at a radio station in a group of 10 people. but I mustered through it, and I can now successfully do that without breaking into a sweat. But I still hate it.
Yeah, it's definitely the biggest fear by far. And I have my own theories on kind of where it came from. I mean, when I acknowledged that I had social anxiety, that was my start to the journey of wanting to understand it more. I was always kind of, trying to figure things out. I was a very creative kind of kid, always wanting to know how things worked. So I was like, well, if you can figure out how a VCR works, maybe you can figure out how your mind works when it comes to, why I'm afraid of this. There's got to be a reason. And I think the real fear comes down to we're afraid of failure. We're afraid of failing in front of other people. And to us, the worst way you can fail, the worst way you can make a fool of yourself is by opening your mouth. So I think that's where the root stems from, of why so many of us, and I believe actually all of us, to some degree or another, are afraid of speaking in front of other people.
What's the largest group of people you've spoken in front of, Marcus?
The largest group would have been just over 2,500.
So do you still get nervous even after writing your book and after having that experience in front of 2,500 people and using some of the processes that you've put in place in your book? You still have issues with it, or still have that rapid heartbeat as you step up to the mic for the first time?
Of course. You're never cured. There's no cure for social anxiety, just like there's no cure for depression or many other mental illnesses. There's only ways to lessen the symptoms of them. So I still get nervous to this day speaking in front of people, but it's how you control it. In our brains, in our primitive brains, we always generate the fight or flight response in a nervous situation. But there's nowhere in our brain that says you have to do one or the other. It gives you those two options, and you get to pick. So if you pick to run and hide from the situation, obviously you're going to have a different outcome than if you choose to stay and fight. So I think there's a process, some steps that you can do when you're having these anxious feelings that can help you direct that energy in a creative instead of a destructive path.
In my notes, I wrote down the word process just prior to you saying the word process. So let's walk through each of those processes or maybe one or two processes between small, medium, and large groups. So what would be, the simple process for me to have conversation with, you and somebody else?
So that's the easy one. When people come to me and they say, hey, I've got social anxiety, I can't speak to, a couple of people. That's the easy one. All you have to do, there's one step. All you have to do is start talking. Once you get past that first initial, it's going to be a little bit bumpy to start. Once you're past that, you're good. When you're in front of just a couple of people and there's going to be a back and forth, you're only nervous to start the conversation. Once you get going, you will get lost in your own conversation, in your own thoughts, and you'll forget about it eventually. And that's typically the best advice that I can give for small interactions. If you're afraid to speak in front of one or two people or to start a conversation with maybe someone you find attractive, usually it's that first step. It's just taking the leap. Once you get the ball rolling, the momentum will probably be there.
That makes sense. Okay, now we step it up a couple. Let's say, all right, you've got the engagement with those two people, and pretty soon a couple more people show up, and we've got this medium-sized group. Oh, my goodness. What do I do now, Marcus?
Okay, so now you're going to start to feel the real effects of stage fright. You're going to start, having the pupil dilation. You're going to start sweating. Your heart rate's going to increase, and you're going to be put in that fight or flight sense. And the first thing you want to do is acknowledge that you're feeling anxious. And this is, a basic principle of, psychologists is acknowledging the issue, acknowledging that you are anxious. And once you've acknowledged that you're anxious, you can start to work through those symptoms. So for me, when I start to get anxious, let's say right before I'm about to speak in front of a crowd, my heart rate starts to increase. I start getting sweaty. I start getting really nervous. The first thing I start to do is slow my breathing down. The easiest way is to just think about your biological processes and slow those down. Then you can start to conquer the mental things. Once you've got your heart rate down and you're a little bit more relaxed, you're going to be thinking clearer. You're going to have kind of flushed some of that excess adrenaline from your bloodstream. And then you can start to tell yourself, hey, these people are here for you. They're not here to see you fail. They're not here to laugh at you. These people are here to see you. You know your stuff. You know what you're going to say. You've got this. Start building yourself up. There's nothing wrong with a little self-praise right before you're about to go out and speak. I know myself and a lot of other great speakers do this to some degree or another. It really, it kind of knocks you back into reality, saying, you know this stuff. If no one else was in this room and you were about to speak, you'd be able to nail it. You already know this stuff. So telling yourself that will kind of reset your frame of mind and get you back in the right train of thinking, more positive, more self-praise. And when you step out on stage, you're going to be a lot more confident in yourself, and that's going to be portrayed to your audience.
It sounds so simple.
It is. It's such a simple process. It's just acknowledging it and making the conscious decision that I'm going to work through this. Because it's not a simple task. It is one task, but it's not a simple one. And that's the biggest thing. It's so much easier to just say, I'm socially anxious or I hate talking in front of people. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to avoid it for my entire life. Well, yeah, of course you're going to be scared for the rest of your life if you never just go up and do it. Because once you do, what I realized, and I talk about it in my book, after those first couple of events that I did, I realized that it wasn't that scary anymore. I realized that a lot of the fears that I had of people laughing at me or me botching complete sentences, they didn't happen nearly as much as I thought. And they would happen less and less if I didn't think about them at all.
A lot of times, too, I know that I've talked myself out of doing things just because it's like, I don't want to sound stupid. I don't want to have to talk about that. What if I mess up somebody's name? Yaddy, yaddy, yaddy. And pretty soon you're thinking all this stuff, and you're dealing with last names like Johnson and Smith, and anybody can say those, and you're worried about nothing. And people really, honestly, I've noticed for myself when I have to MC things, even though I dislike doing it, that they're really not there to see you. They're there to watch the other stuff that's going on around you, at least as an MC. But as a speaker, like when you're out there doing a speech, that's probably a whole different deal.
Yeah. I've done both. I'm actually I'm in Portland, Oregon right now, about to give a speech this week at a conference, and it's a 45-minute speech of very technical, machinery kind of specs and different rules and regulations, which is much different than some of the MC stuff I've done in the past, where it's I'm on the mic for 30 seconds and then I'm off the mic. But again, it's like I was talking about before in the personal interactions. Once you get the ball rolling, you're going to build that momentum. So for me, when I'm doing these longer speeches, it's really crucial that I remember to try and nail the first 2 minutes. If I can nail the first 2 minutes, I'm going to feel really good about the rest of the speech. So it's my goal. I only think about the first 2 minutes right before I'm about to go on, because I know that if I could nail those first 2 minutes, I'm going to do so much better for the rest of the speech. And then beforehand, I don't have to worry about a full 45 minutes. I only have to worry about 2, which is a lot less daunting.
Absolutely, it is. So then is that kind of the same process that you use for your 10 to 10,000 people speech?
Exactly the same process. And it's a process is the best word to describe it. I talk about in the beginning of the book that you have to learn to walk before you can run, just like you have to learn how to speak in front of 2 people before you can speak in front of 10,000. You need to work on your speaking chops on a small scale before you can work your way all the way up to big scale. You don't want to just jump in the deep end and hope for the best. The reason that I can do what I do is because I've devoted so much time to mastering each level of speaking. I couldn't have spoke at this event, even 5 years ago, probably. It's been a progression of, okay, we'll do a speech with 50 people in the crowd, and then 100 people, then 200, and then you keep working up from there. And you say, okay, the first one will be 10 minutes long, and then 15, and now we're up to 45 minutes. So everything is a process, and you don't want to bite off more than you can chew right away. If you take small steps, they're going to feel small. 100 people looks a lot like 150 people, but 10,000 doesn't look anything like 100.
No, probably not at all. So did you learn how to do this out of necessity, or did you write the book out of necessity because you had to get in front of groups and talk to them?
I learned how to speak due to necessity. When I was a kid, I suffered from severe social anxiety to the point where I couldn't even say here when the teacher was doing roll call in a class. I would get so anxious just to say the word here that it was mind-boggling. Luckily, my last name started with a B, so I didn't have to wait very long, or I might have passed out. So from there, I realized that I had a problem, and it started to bleed into my schooling, where many of my teachers thought that I couldn't read very well because I couldn't read out loud. So they correlated that to mean that I couldn't read at all. So I was in special reading classes for many years until they gave me a silent reading test where I scored right in the normal range, which then made me realize in 6th grade that if I didn't learn how to speak to my fellow classmates and teachers and other people, I was going to get left behind. So that's what started the process. It definitely was out of necessity to learn how to speak. And then my obsessive compulsive brain just kept taking it to the next level. Each time I was like, okay, I've mastered how to speak in front of this many people. Let's just keep going. And then eventually it just morphed into what it is now. When you've conquered one thing and you just keep pushing yourself, soon enough you're speaking in front of 2,500 people.
So is it different than sitting down and having an interview with somebody one-on-one like this, or do you consider this just being a conversation that happens to be recorded to play back later as a podcast?
The biggest difference between a conversation like this and a speech, which is usually what most people are afraid of, is that a speech pulls away the safety net. Here, there's a back and forth. If I, get a brain fart and can't think of the next thing, I can just insert a quick question and throw the ball back into your side of the court. When you're giving a speech and you have 20, 30, 40 minutes where everyone's attention's on you, you have no safety net now. If you have a brain fart, if you mess up, it's going to be noticed. Or at least that's what we perceive. That's what's going to happen, which typically is not the case. I mean, the small mistakes that we make in our speech are rarely noticed by other people. There's a well-documented psychological phenomenon called the spotlight effect, which says that we always assume that our actions are noticed more than they truly are. So when we make a mistake, we think that it was this huge fault that everyone saw, when in all actuality, no one probably even noticed it.
So you mentioned safety net. What about that? Oh crap! I forgot where I am. What do I do now? Where do I go? Everybody's looking at my zippers down. What do I do?
So if you make a really bad one, something you can't cover up easily, which I've done. In my book, I talk about, not to spoil it for anyone, I talk about a couple of events that I did where things did not go as planned, where glaring things happened that you can't just sweep under the rug real quick. And the best thing to do is remember that your audience is human, you're human, they understand, they get it. You can make light of the situation, acknowledge your mistake, acknowledge that you had a brain fart or that your zipper was down, try to make a joke out of it, and move on. And by the time you're a minute into the next section, they'll have already forgotten it happened.
Seems a lot easier said than done, because that honestly,
it definitely is.
That's my biggest fear right there when it comes to talking in public or doing any of that stuff. That's the reason why I shy away from it, because of that. But just put it aside and just go forward and push forward, young soldier.
Yeah, I mean, there's when you're out there, the famous quote, "The show must go on." You're going to look a lot worse if you put your tail between your legs and scamper off stage. The best thing you can do is show that you're human, and show that you're willing to go on and push through it, and then try and make up the ground that you lost a little bit. It was a small slip, but instead of jumping off the mountain entirely, just make up the ground that you lost there. I've done it many times, and sure, you're going to feel like an idiot in the moment, and you're going to feel a little ridiculous. And sure, some people, if it was legitimately funny, which I've had legitimately funny things happen while I'm speaking, then don't fault them for laughing at something that's legitimately funny. Make light of it, understand that these things happen, and keep going. The worst thing you can do is give up in that moment.
Marcus, is it different when you're selling in front of a group of people? So if you're selling one-on-one compared to 10 people in the room, or if you've got to do a whole board of directors, is it a different process than it is when you're just speaking to them as an entertainer or as a speaker?
Yes and no. So when you're specifically selling, which I've had the pleasure to be in professional sales roles, which get to utilize speaking ability quite a lot. Selling one-on-one and selling to a larger group, there's only a couple of nuances that I have found, because usually bigger groups are still going to ask questions, and you can still ask them questions in a sales pitch. So there's a little bit less of that, no safety net feeling, because you can cover it up a little bit. But there is money riding on it now, which can only, can heighten the fears of failure. Because if you fail, then you might not get a paycheck, or you might not get the commission that you were hoping for on that sale. But as far as, the main differences, I would say making sure you engage with all members there. A lot of times we forget and we focus in just on the one person that we know, and it makes the rest of that audience feel isolated. It makes them feel like you're speaking directly to one person or two people, and you need to make everyone there feel like they're a part of the conversation, or feel like they're part of the presentation.
When it comes to job creation and entrepreneurship, where do you grab your inspiration?
I grab it from all over. I think that is, one talent that I do have is I bridge the gap between a lot of different industries, and I love to learn. I mean, I read, 20 to 30 nonfiction books a year, and I'll take bits and pieces and say, okay, I like this industry. But over in this industry, they're doing this cool thing that we could maybe take just that piece and plop it in this industry, and you have a new, business plan, a new way of doing that. And that's where a lot of my inspiration comes from for a lot of the different business ventures that I've done. I also get really scatterbrained to the annoyance of my friends sometimes, where, we'll be out doing something and someone will have like a weird comment, and that will spiral me into this whole business plan on how we could make money with that weird comment. And they're like, that is way beyond the joke I was trying to make, Marcus. A friend will be like, man, that dog would look so weird in a hat. And I'm like, well, what if we built hats and sold them online and we market them to dog owners so that every dog could wear a hat? And they're like, what? What do you even... I get these weird ideas of how you can make money doing pretty much anything. And I think that's a trait that most entrepreneurs share, is we've always got money on the brain, and we're always have those gears turning of, what's the next thing that we can do?
Have you had any of those ideas that have turned into money-making ventures?
The public speaking. Because I started in high school, actually. So I always had a love for music, and I started producing music on my laptop, just different beats and stuff. And that turned into DJing. And then the DJing, someone was like, hey, can you DJ my party? I'll give you $50. And a light bulb went off in my head that said, oh my God, I can make money doing this. And that spiraled into, the most successful business that I've ever done, which was the DJ, MC, speaking, and event consulting company. And I did that for many, many years, which was extremely profitable, doing the DJ work, the MC work. When you're doing DJ work, inevitably someone's going to say, hey, can we hire you just to speak? Can we hire you just to be on the mic? And I'm like, sure, if you pay me for it. And that led into so many other things, and then eventually led into this book. So I would say that is probably the most successful.
The book is called Speak Confident, a collection of stories and advice on overcoming social anxiety. What are the 3 takeaways that somebody would have from reading this book?
I would say the first one is, acknowledge that you have social anxiety. That's the first step. The next is going to be put yourself out there. And then the last is going to be a culmination of a lot of the tips and techniques. There's going to be, because everyone is subjective to their own needs, everyone's going to have a different last takeaway. They're going to find one of the tips better than all the rest. The sample audience and the people who've read it so far, the feedback I've gotten has been all over the board. I thought there'd be one culminating thing that people resonate with, but it's been everyone picks a different thing, a different tip, a different technique that they found the most profound. And I think that's because we all have our own unique insecurities, our own unique struggles that we're trying to overcome. So the last thing that they're going to take away is one of the tips and techniques in that book. And I can't say exactly which one.
So Marcus, where can we pick up Speak Confident?
So it's available on Amazon, both in the Kindle version and the hard copy. And it's also available on Audible, iTunes, and Google Play as the audiobook. All of those are available now. You just go on Amazon.com and search Speak-Confident. And if you want to learn more, you can go to Speak-Confident.com. And if you want to join the community of others just like you trying to overcome social anxiety, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. The
BSing with Bob Schmidt podcast is brought to you by Orange Computer. Find them online at orangecomputerlax.com.
This has been another podcastforhire.com production.